going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. With it being Oscar season, I wanted to stop and do a few rankings of some of the categories. So, we're going to start things off with a ranking of all 5 best animated feature films from, well, good to great, as I liked all these movies actually. But nevertheless, before we begin, let me know in the comments what your ranking of the best animated feature films are. As always, this is just my list and not a definitive ranking. Also, make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these videos, as it helps me out immensely by getting my content out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with more movie-related content like reviews and rankings. So, let's not waste any more time, and let's jump into the list. Number 5, The Seabees, and this one had some unfortunate timing to it, as a few months before it got released, Netflix announced that it would be slashing its animation budget and scaling back on all of its in-house animated productions. And then this got released and it turned out to look absolutely fantastic. So it's really disappointing to see that the Netflix animation team gave us something so visually stunning, yet now we're not getting too many more of these movies and shows from them, at least not anytime soon. And it's also a shame that we just didn't get to see this one on the big screen because of just how gorgeous the animation looked. The attention to detail in all the landscapes were fantastic, and the film as a whole captures so nicely that feel of just a good old-fashioned high-stakes adventure movie, especially due to its scoring, its energy, and emotional resonance all coming together so well. Now, the reason this is also placed last on this list is also because the basic summation of its story winds up being the biggest strike against it, because this is essentially just How to Train Your Dragon by way of Pirates of the Caribbean. It takes the same general outline of How to Train Your Dragon, some of the same conflicts, the character tropes, the same lovable, misunderstood title creatures, and it just swaps out the Viking setting with a pirate setting. So, in terms of its dramatic beats, it's not very surprising. You can call where this movie goes from the minute it starts. Now, that being said, while that prevented me from placing it higher on this list, it still doesn't ultimately detract from it being a good time. This isn't just visually stunning but emotionally hollow or anything. It's still very funny. Our protagonists still have some very likable personalities, especially thanks to some great voice acting. Carl Urban is very charismatic as always, and you do care for these characters and you have fun following them. There's certainly a charm, but because I found a lot of its story elements to be pretty by the numbers, I just couldn't quite put it up there as best of the year or anything. Number 4, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, and this was such a pleasant surprise, mainly because, as I'm sure is the case for just about everyone, I've long rode off the Shrek franchise at this point. The first Puss in Boots was decent, but every entry since Shrek 2 has failed to recapture the magic and wit that made those first 2 movies such a lightning in a bottle. Now, I wouldn't say this is quite on the same level as Shrek 1 or 2, which I know is something a lot of people have been saying. Like, those 2 movies were easily greatest of all times for me, and this, not quite so much, but it's still really close to getting back to that same level of quality. This is such a snappy, fast-paced, highly energetic movie that's equally parts funny, emotional, and even a little bit dark, at least in terms of a kid's movie. Like, there's a whole storyline about how the literal manifestation of death is chasing Puss in Boots around, and the design for this character goes hard, with his beet red eyes, sadistic smile and taunting, the moody atmosphere anytime he's around. I honestly was not expecting that. Now, it's not the tone of the whole movie, and it actually does a nice job balancing that stuff out with the lighter material, but I was still surprised we just got it in general. But as for the rest of the movie, it's just so much fun. The animation style in particular is great, taking a page out of movies like Into the Spider-Verse and Mitchell's vs. the Machines, where it mixes 2D and 3D animation, has characters moving at like 100 miles a minute. There's a musical sequence opening the film with Puss in Boots bouncing all over the place that's just a blast. And the subversions on each fairy tale felt fresh, like having Goldilocks and the Three Bears being a crime outfit, or having Little Jack Horner be a mob boss. Though they weren't subversive just for the sake of it. They were so much fun, and everyone was really well written. Now, as the story itself goes, I'd say the last act does feel a bit on the generic side. The way it all comes together doesn't have that exact same sharp originality that we got from the earlier parts of the movie. It's still funny, but the story itself isn't quite as unique as the first 2 acts, so that's ultimately why it landed where it is on this list. But still, overall, this is a really fun time, and it's easily the best Shrek-related movie since Shrek 2. Number 3, Turning Red. Now, despite this being the more well-received critically of the 2 Pixar movies from last year, this actually had its own share of controversy, as brief as it was, due to the film's storyline of a young girl turning into a giant panda, being a metaphor for puberty. And with some of the jokes also being slightly on the edgier side, at least relative to what's expected from a family-friendly movie these days, there was some backlash where parents called into question if this was appropriate for their kids. Now, I will say, as I'm not a parent, it's totally up to you if you have kids what you think is appropriate, but I didn't really find this movie inappropriate. And actually, I really think most of the metaphorical aspects are gonna go over younger audiences' heads. It's kind of in that vein of a lot of kids' shows and movies, especially in the 90s that I grew up on, that incorporated a lot of adult humor, and a lot of it went over my head and everyone else's head at the time until we all got older. I feel like it's the same case with this movie, but all that aside, I really enjoy this one. It's definitely one of the freshest feeling of a lot of recent Pixar's efforts, and it's definitely the funniest of all their recent efforts. This takes a lot of influence from anime especially, with a zippy, fast-paced feel and a lot of frantic editing, and with characters being written with such a big energy about them. Some people have said this results in characters coming off as annoying, as there are times where they're just constantly at an 11, but I never really found any of the dialogue to be bad or any of the behavior to be too unlikable or obnoxious. If anything, I found it to be one of the main reasons why it was so funny. I just got a kick out of so many of the exchanges here, like how our protagonist would freak out over this boy band, which becomes a huge plot point throughout the movie. But if nothing else though, even if not everything else about this film landed for you, at least you can say you were never bored by it. It's a very entertaining and energetic movie. But with that, it also brings the amount of heart that we expect when we go to watch a Pixar movie. While the metaphorical aspects will more than likely go over younger audiences' heads, they, along with pretty much all audiences, will still be able to appreciate it for the way it touches on familial relationships, the clashing of generations, and being able to be your own person and taking those first steps as you get older and you start living your own life. Those themes are just as strong as the film's fast-paced sense of humor. And the way it balanced those two major elements out, it felt very much like classic Pixar, and it showed that there's still very much a huge creative spark left in the studio that hasn't exactly been quite as consistent as it once was. So I do hope to see more films from them in this vein. Our runner-up is Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, one of 3 Pinocchio movies from 2022 actually, and easily the best of them by a long shot, brought to life by some beautiful stop-motion animation, a medium that honestly I wish we got more of, as time-consuming as it can be. Now, with Disney's version of the character treading some darker territory, but ultimately still being a fairly whimsical, super family-friendly ride, this definitely goes back to the original source material and goes for what's the darkest portrayal that I've at least seen. I haven't seen every adaptation of the story, but this is the darkest of what I've seen. But this sets the story against the backdrop of World War II, which becomes integral to several plot points, and this also sees several characters undergo some pretty traumatic experiences. Like, I'd actually argue this is less for kids than Turning Red, especially due to the way it heavily tackles the subject of death, with some characters meeting fairly gruesome endings. But it's not one of those movies that's just overtly depressing or joyless or anything, don't get me wrong there, because there's still a charm to it. You come to be so invested in Pinocchio himself, who's very ignorant of the horrors of the real world, but is also so likable at the same time, to the point where there are moments you're getting some chuckles from his ignorance. Plus, you have Ewan McGregor as Sebastian J. Cricket, who provides a lot of the comedic relief while not undermining the emotional weight of the overall story. The visuals are stunning, with this sense of awe as it explores some of its more supernatural elements. And while it is a movie about a talking puppet, a talking cricket, fairies, and all these other fantastical elements, at the heart of it is a very humane, relatable, profound story that discusses grief, moving on from grief, finding meaning in your life, and it can feel very existential at times in the way it hits upon those themes, like to the point that it almost had me in tears during a couple of scenes, but it mostly does so in a very touching way that overall makes this one of the very best adaptations of this timeless story. But in first place is Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, an absolutely delightful film that I was just completely enamored with from start to finish. I've still never seen the original shorts. I didn't even fully realize it was based on any shorts, which were apparently a huge deal way back when they were first released, but I went into this not really knowing much about the character or knowing too much what to expect, and I loved every minute of it. It's one of those films that might seem small in scale, both literally and figuratively, with its limited cast and settings, but it makes the absolute most use of its resources to tell one of the most emotionally profound and funniest movies of the year. It uses its razor-sharp wit to tackle meaningful themes, with its emotional core being about our relationships and the things that we value the most, showing how much of an impact someone who's not always out there in plain sight can have on so many others, and it gives the story such a larger-than-life feel. But what I especially loved about it is its sense of optimism and sincerity. I mean, it can be pretty sad at times. When it goes to pull on our heartstrings, it can certainly swing for the fences, but Marcel the character is someone who always manages to take a glass-half-full approach to even the most dire of situations, even if something's negatively affecting him or his loved ones, and that's the overall tone taken by this film. It's about finding something good out of a terrible situation, though without trying to have any forced optimism. In fact, nothing about this ever really felt forced. Like I said, it can be really funny, but it's also not trying to go out of its way to make these silly gags or try to force humor into situations where it's not called for. These characters, in particular Marcel himself, are just organically funny, sometimes through the most mundane things they might say, though we're always laughing with them and not at them, and you come to really enjoy the journey that we get to take with them. And it just makes for an overall fantastic time. It's a film that had me grinning from ear to ear from start to finish. It was easily one of my favorite movies of 2022, and it comes in as my number one of this year's best animated feature nominees. But let me know, what's your ranking of this year's best animated film nominees? Did you agree with this list at all? Did you disagree with it? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and share it. And for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching, everyone, and keep having fun with film.